May 6th, 1937. 36 seconds. That is all it took for the largest flying machine ever built by human hands to turn into a falling wall of fire. It was longer than 3 Boeing 747s standing nose to tail. It carried passengers in private cabins, a dining room, a lounge, even a smoking room, on board a machine filled with one of the most flammable gases on Earth. Newspapers called it the Titanic of the skies. And just like the Titanic, almost everyone believed it could never happen to them, but it did. In front of dozens of reporters, in front of newsreel cameras, and in front of a radio announcer whose voice, breaking down live on air, would become one of the most famous recordings in broadcast history. This is the true story of the Hindenburg disaster, how it was built, why it was doomed from the very beginning, and what really caused the fire that ended the age of the airship forever. To understand why the Hindenburg existed at all, you have to go back to the 1920s and early 1930s, a time before commercial airplanes could fly long distances safely or comfortably. If you wanted to cross the Atlantic Ocean in this era, you had 2 choices: a slow ocean liner that took 5 to 7 days, or a rigid airship, a giant engine-powered balloon with a metal skeleton that could do it in half the time, floating gently through the sky instead of crashing through ocean waves. Germany was the world leader in this technology. The Zeppelin company, named after its founder Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, had already built and flown the Graf Zeppelin, which had completed a full trip around the world in 1929 without a single serious incident. Airships were seen as the future of luxury air travel. So when Germany decided to build an even bigger, even more advanced airship in the early 1930s, expectations were sky high, literally. The new airship was named the LZ-129 Hindenburg, after German President Paul von Hindenburg. Construction began in 1931 and finished in 1936. Some numbers so you understand exactly what we're talking about. The Hindenburg was 245 meters long. That's about 803 feet. To put that in perspective, it was longer than the Titanic. It could carry over 200,000 cubic meters of lifting gas. It cruised at about 125 kilometers per hour, powered by 4 massive diesel engines. Inside, it wasn't just a flying machine, it was a flying hotel. There were passenger cabins, a dining room with fine china, a lounge with a specially built lightweight piano, a smoking room. Yes, a smoking room on an airship filled with flammable gas. More on that later. And large viewing windows so passengers could watch the ocean and clouds pass beneath them. A one-way ticket across the Atlantic cost around $400, equivalent to several $1,000s today. This was transportation for the wealthy, for diplomats, for celebrities. But here is the detail that changed everything. The Hindenburg was designed to fly using helium gas, not hydrogen. Helium doesn't burn. It's inert, completely safe. The engineers wanted it. But there was a problem, a political one. At the time, the United States controlled almost the entire world's supply of helium. And in 1937, Nazi Germany was already showing its aggressive intentions to the world, remilitarizing, expanding, threatening its neighbors. Under the US Helium Control Act, American law banned the export of helium to foreign nations for military reasons, and Germany, now under Adolf Hitler's regime, was considered a national security risk. Even though the Hindenburg was technically a civilian passenger airship, the United States refused to sell Germany the helium it needed. So German engineers were forced to make a decision that, in hindsight, was catastrophic. They filled the Hindenburg with hydrogen instead. Hydrogen is incredibly light, which makes it excellent for lifting a massive airship into the sky. But it has one enormous danger: it is extremely flammable. All it takes is a spark, static electricity, or an open flame near a hydrogen leak, and the result can be an explosion. The Zeppelin company knew this. They had decades of experience handling hydrogen safely. Safety procedures were strict. Smoking was only allowed in one sealed, pressurized room with a single door that had to be closed before a cigarette could even be lit. Crew members wore special shoes to avoid static sparks. Everything was designed around one central fear: fire. For over 200 successful flights using hydrogen-filled Zeppelins before this, nothing had gone catastrophically wrong. The Hindenburg itself had already completed dozens of safe transatlantic crossings in 1936 alone, becoming the fastest way to cross the ocean. Confidence was high, maybe too high. On May 3, 1937, the Hindenburg took off from Frankfurt, Germany, beginning its first scheduled transatlantic crossing of the new season. On board were 36 passengers and 61 crew members, a total of 97 people. The flight across the Atlantic was smooth. Passengers enjoyed fine dining, wrote letters in the lounge, admired the sunset from the windows. To them, this felt no different from any luxury voyage. The airship was scheduled to land at Naval Air Station Lakehurst in New Jersey on the morning of May 6th. But strong thunderstorms and unpredictable winds over the East Coast forced Captain Max Pruss to delay the landing by several hours. The Hindenburg flew in circles along the coastline, waiting for the weather to clear. Finally, at around 7 p.m. local time, ground control gave the signal. Conditions were safe enough to land. Dozens of journalists, photographers, and newsreel cameramen were already waiting at Lakehurst. This landing was considered routine news. Nobody expected anything unusual. Among them was radio reporter Herbert Morrison, recording a routine broadcast for a Chicago radio station, describing the majestic airship as it approached. At 7:21 p.m., the Hindenburg began its final descent, dropping its mooring lines to the ground crew below. Nobody in that crowd knew they were about to witness one of the most infamous disasters in aviation history. At 7:25 p.m., witnesses on the ground saw something odd, a flicker, a small flash near the rear of the airship, close to the tail fin. Within seconds, that flicker became a fireball. Flames erupted from the top of the Hindenburg's hull and spread with terrifying speed. Because the airship was filled with hydrogen gas, over 7 million cubic feet of it, the fire didn't just burn, it consumed the entire structure almost instantly. The tail of the ship collapsed first, crashing to the ground as the front briefly rose into the air from the shift in weight. Passengers and crew, many of whom had been standing near the windows just moments before, were suddenly engulfed in smoke, flame, and falling debris. People jumped from windows that were still several meters above the ground, choosing a dangerous fall over being trapped inside the burning wreckage. Ground crew members ran toward the flames, not away from them, trying to pull survivors from the wreckage. And through it all, Herbert Morrison's radio microphone was still recording. His voice, calm at first, describing the ship's arrival, cracked with horror as the disaster unfolded in front of him. His words, capturing raw disbelief and heartbreak in real time, would go down as one of the most emotional live recordings in broadcasting history, replayed for generations afterward. From the first spark to the moment, the entire structure had collapsed into a burning skeleton on the ground, approximately 34 to 37 seconds. Less time than it took you to listen to this sentence and the one before it. Of the 97 people on board, 35 died, 13 passengers and 22 crew members. One member of the ground crew was also killed. In total, 36 people lost their lives. But here is a detail most people don't expect. 62 people survived. Many crew members, especially those positioned in the front control car and engine cars, were able to escape because the front of the ship rose upward and remained intact slightly longer, giving them a chance to jump clear before the flames reached them. Survivors described running through fire, their clothes and hair burning, some receiving severe burns that would affect them for the rest of their lives. Ground crew who rushed toward the wreck to help pull people out were hailed as heroes. The disaster was front-page news around the world within hours. The newsreel footage, silent in black and white, showing the airship collapsing in real time, was shown in cinemas everywhere. Combined with Herbert Morrison's emotional radio recording, the Hindenburg disaster became one of the first major news events to be experienced by the public, almost as if they had witnessed it themselves. In the decades since 1937, investigators, engineers, and historians have proposed multiple explanations. Here is what the evidence actually points to. The most widely accepted theory, based on the official 1937 investigation and later scientific analysis, is this. During the final approach, the Hindenburg's outer skin and metal frame likely built up an electrical charge, partly due to the thunderstorm conditions in the atmosphere that day. At the same time, hydrogen gas may have been leaking from one of the ship's internal gas cells, possibly due to a broken bracing wire or structural stress during a sharp turn made just before landing. When the ship's mooring lines touched the wet ground, they may have grounded the airship's frame, while the outer fabric skin remained electrically charged, creating a difference in electrical potential. This mismatch could have caused a static spark to jump between the frame and the skin, right in the area where leaking hydrogen gas had accumulated. The result? Ignition. And once hydrogen catches fire, it burns with terrifying speed. There was also a competing theory, popular for years, suggesting sabotage, that someone opposed to Nazi Germany may have planted a bomb on board. Investigators looked into this seriously, given the political tensions of the era. However, no credible evidence of sabotage was ever found, and this theory is now largely dismissed by historians and aviation experts. The most likely truth is far simpler, and in some ways far more tragic. It wasn't an attack, it was physics, a specific unlucky combination of weather, static electricity, and a highly flammable gas that should never have been used for passenger travel in the first place. The Hindenburg disaster didn't just destroy one airship, it destroyed public trust in an entire form of travel. Within a short time, passenger service on rigid hydrogen airships came to a complete stop. The Graf Zeppelin, which had flown safely for years, was grounded permanently. Germany's plans to build more giant passenger airships were abandoned. The age of the airship, which had once seemed like the future of long-distance travel, ended almost overnight. Instead, the future belonged to fixed-wing airplanes, which continued to improve rapidly through the following decades, eventually making transatlantic flight faster, safer, and accessible to millions of ordinary people. Today, the wreckage site at Lakehurst is marked with a small memorial. The Hindenburg story is remembered not just as a tragedy, but as a turning point, the moment humanity learned, in the most public and devastating way possible, that some risks are simply not worth taking, no matter how impressive the technology looks. 36 seconds changed the future of air travel forever. The Hindenburg was a marvel of engineering, a symbol of national pride, and ultimately, a warning. A warning about what happens when politics, ambition, and a dangerous gas combine in the sky above a watching world. And somewhere in old newsreel archives, that fire still burns, a permanent reminder of the day the age of the airship came crashing down.